Good morning everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome to Behind the Character, the craft of bringing brands to life. I'm Faith Davidson, Account Director here at Drummond Central, and joining me today are Kev Hughes, Creative Director, and later on we'll also be joined by Jayne Andrews, Marketing Director at Fentimans. Here at Drummond Central, we've spent years helping brands find their voice, craft their personality, and helping them stand out from competitors. And sometimes that means creating a brand character. It's something we absolutely love doing because when it's done well, a brand character isn't just entertaining, it can become one of the most powerful assets a brand can have. To start us off, Kev, when you think of great brand characters, which one springs to mind first and why?
Great question. So the ones that really stick in my mind are Tony the Tiger, the Honey Monster, Jolly Green Giant, we've got the Milky Bar Kid, Andrex Puppy, Ronald McDonald, and then you've got the Michelin Man. The Meerkats, Alexander and his compatriot and his sidekick Sergei, and one of my all-time favourites, Snap, Crackle and Pop. I guess these characters have been consistent over time and distinctive. We've seen them again and again. They stick in your head, and I guess that's what makes a powerful brand character.
Exactly. They're the kind of characters that stick in people's minds for years, and that's exactly what we're going to dig into today. What makes them work, why they're effective, and how to go about creating one. So what makes a brand character effective? Before we dive into the creative journey, let's talk about the why. Every marketer really just wants one thing, and that's for their brand to be top of mind and first choice for customers. Brand characters can become a distinctive brand asset when invested in over time. Something that people instantly recognise and attribute back to a brand, which can be a really powerful thing in helping a brand stand out. But we also believe another real strength of a character goes beyond brand attribution. And that's because they can carry personality, entertain, and create emotional connections with customers. And when you put both of those things together, the benefit is clear. Characters help create long-lasting memory structures that keep a brand top of mind when customers are ready to purchase. So Kev, from a creative perspective, what does that look like in practice?
So honestly, characters are like a brand's personality brought to life. They let us tell stories in a way that feels natural and authentic. You're not just selling, you're entertaining. Like Alexander the Meerkat, for instance. He turned something pretty dull and dry, an insurance tool, into something actually people were really invested in, engaged, and actually were looking forward to watching. Or Tony the Tiger, for instance. He's been raw and strong for over 70 years. This kind of cultural stickiness, you just can't buy. Creatively, it means we've got this single living form that carries the whole brand. Tone, humour, warmth, all in one. And that makes the work more distinctive, more memorable, and let's be honest, just way more fun. And ultimately, that's what makes it more effective too.
And that effectiveness is why characters aren't just nice to have, they can be strategic assets. When they're done well, they can build long-term equity and keep brands top of mind when it matters most. So we thought we'd take you on a bit of a journey of some of the brand characters Drummond Central have helped to develop over the years. We've helped to bring some really different brands to life, and we're going to take you through a handful of them.
So a recent one we had a lot of fun working on was for Faye's new Creamy Dreamy desserts. Because it was a brand new product line, we needed an idea that would really cut through and have stand out in a really crowded market. Enter Bessie Smooth, a super cool R&B singing cow with impeccable taste and a voice as silky smooth as the desserts themselves.
I'm gonna lift the lid on this creamy dreamy vibe. Check the cup, see what's up, that ain't yogurt inside.
Creamy Dreamy dessert from Faye, as delicious as it sounds.
Can I get a Faye?
She's basically the product brought to life. And because Creamy Dreamy has the sense of indulgence, sophistication, we steered clear from making her too cartoony or slapstick. Instead, we played it straight. She's this real R&B artist, well-written lyrics, proper music videos, high production values. Every spot was essentially a love song to Creamy Dreamy, delivered in a silky, velvety tone Bessie could only pull off.
Can I get a Faye?
When we first started working with Zinza, we knew straight away that it wasn't an average paint brand. The tins were full of fight and talk, promising to kill mould, block tough stains and make problems disappear. It wasn't just a paint that sorted problems out, but it left a really good finish as well. So we thought, what if the brand itself had a couple of fixes? Enter the Zinzer twins.
Frank Zinzer here, and I'm his brother Fabian. We get rid of problems quickly and professionally. Take the unfortunate fire at the Horse and Hounds in Bethnal Green. Our Zinzer bin primer seals in smoke damage
And blocks all those ghastly odours.
permanently.
When did the Horse and Hounds catch fire, Frank?
Next week.
Two East End hard men, tough talking, no nonsense. They gave us humour and an edge when we needed to connect with the brand's white van audience. One twin, all about fixing the problem, and the other, all about delivering a great finish. Together, they allowed us to talk about lots of different products in a really memorable, ownable and entertaining way, while keeping Zinzer's tough talking, problem-solving credentials front and centre.
And then earlier this year, we launched our most recent character campaign. This time it was for Dreams Beds.
Find me somebody to love. Find me somebody to love. Can anybody find me somebody to love?
If anybody can find you a bed to love, Dreams can. Good luck.
Ourselves and the client really wanted to shake this category up. You know, it's pretty sleepy category, pun very much intended. You know, people talk about their beds like relationships, so we took ours literally and asked ourselves, what if beds could talk, and what if they could sing? That gave us characters like Betty, Snoozin and Matty, mattresses with their own voice and quirks. Suddenly comfort and connection became something playful. The launch campaign had them belting out Queen's Somebody to Love, bold and unexpected.
What links all of these examples is that they each had a very clear and specific job to do for the brand, and each character in their own right became a really ownable way for the brands to stand out and connect with their audience. So, how do you actually go about creating one of these characters? The truth is, it takes a lot of time. It's a shared collaborative process between the agency and the client, because at the end of the day, the characters have to represent their brand. Here at Drummond Central, we use something that we call the 5 foundations of a great brand character to help get us started, each with their own principles to keep in mind when developing what a character looks, sounds, and acts like. So they are: embody and amplify the positioning of the brand, have a clear and meaningful role to play, be compelling and engaging, have a distinctive look and way of speaking, and have a well thought out backstory. We're going to take you through each one in more detail and show how they take a character from an idea on a page to one that stands out, connects with people, and lasts the test of time.
So people connect with characters in a way that they just don't really do with a business. You know, when you personify a brand, give it a living, breathing form, suddenly it feels more relatable, more human, and way easier to build an emotional connection. It also gives the brand permission to be larger than life, to have a bit of fun, and to even get away and say things that they wouldn't normally get away with. That's why the first step is so important. The character has to embody and amplify the brand's positioning. If the character doesn't feel rooted in the brand itself, then it's basically just a mascot. But when it's grounded in what the brand stands for, it becomes a powerful extension of it, and one that people actually want to engage with and fall in love with.
So a character can't just be there for decoration. They need to do a job. If their role isn't clear, then they can end up feeling like a distraction, rather than actually helping land the message they're there to do. That's why it's so important to really establish their role from the outset. What are they there to do? Are they there to entertain? Are they there to inform? Or just to guide? When you know their role from day one, it really helps shape everything else around it, and the character themselves become immediately more interesting and easier to work with.
So this sounds obvious, right? But it's way easy to get it wrong. A great brand character should make you feel something, whether that's a laugh, a smile, even frustration or anger, if that's what the brand stands for. The point is, they've got to create an emotional connection and response, because that's what keeps people engaged and coming back for more.
In today's sea of sameness, distinctiveness is absolutely key to helping brands stand out. A great character needs to stand out and stand for something, as we touched on earlier, but it's about much more than just how they look. It's about how they sound, what they say, and how they say it. Their words and delivery should feel unmistakably them, right down to their kind of lilt on their voice. And the way that a character speaks can often be more powerful than how they look. Catchphrases, rhythm, quirks, or even the choice of vocabulary that they use can make them instantly recognisable and endlessly repeatable. And that means whether or not you see them on an out-of-home ad or you hear them on the radio, you should instantly know who they are and what brand they stand for.
So this is one people sometimes overlook. Giving your character a proper backstory. Now that doesn't mean we're going to put that to life in ad campaigns or comms, but having it in the back of your mind creatively makes all the difference. When you know who they are, where they come from, what they love, what they stand for, suddenly they feel real. That gives them depth, consistency. And as creatives, it means we're not starting from scratch every time. We've got a framework, what makes writing easier for them, and campaign after campaign. And it also helps with guardrails. You instantly know things that feel real, feel right or feel wrong, things they would and wouldn't get involved in. It's a bit like writing for a TV character. Once you know their backstory, their voice just flows naturally.
Kev, as a creative, how do the 5 foundations really help you and your team when you go about developing a brand character?
So these foundations are basically like a creative compass. And once you get all those arrows pointing in the same direction, you know you're heading the right way. They make sure the character isn't just cute or funny for the sake of it, but actually works for the brand. From embodying the brand to having a clear role, a distinctive look, and a backstory. That keeps them consistent. And it all adds up to the character being engaging, memorable, and can stick around campaign after campaign.
So let's bring the 5 foundations to life with a real-world case study and one of my absolute all-time favourite projects, creating Fentiman for Fentimans. And who better to join us in talking through that journey than Jayne Andrews, Marketing Director at Fentimans. The project is such a great example of the 5 foundations in practice. So Jayne, let's start with you. Before we go into the 5 foundations, what was the initial brand challenge on your side?
Fentimans has been around since 1905, which is a really long time, but the drinks industry is like a lot of other industries, and the category is just a sea of sameness. All the advertising looks the same. You've got a pack shot, you've got natural, botanicals, but there's nothing that's distinct. So we wanted to find a way to stand out in that market.
So when developing creative ideas, Kev, where did Fentiman come from?
So from the off, we fell in love with the idea of a brand champion. Someone who just pops up whenever someone is about to make a bad decision or select something a bit boring and basic and politely nudges them towards something more adventurous, something more discerning and tasteful. A bit like a good taste guardian angel, if you like.
I postulate there's not even any lemons in that concoction. This will make your taste buds blossom. It's botanically brewed with real lemons for an exquisite texture and depth of flavour. And it's infused with the finest otter rose oil from the Karlovo region in Bulgaria. Can you taste Karlovo, Janet?
At first, we thought about casting a celeb, but this approach can come with a bunch of risks. Firstly, it's mega expensive. The character can become another role for them. You're tied down to their personal ups and downs. And we just wanted to make the Fentiman stand on his own 2 feet and be memorable and build his own fame rather than riding someone else's.
Drummond Central presented quite a few ideas to us, as agencies do. I think we had 3 or 4 of them to start with, but that one really stood out to me. There was just something about it that stayed in my head. So we went back to Drummond and said, let's go for it. Let's work with this idea. The other thing about the character that I thought would be useful is we've got a really complicated brand story. We've been around since 1905. We also do this thing called botanical brewing that nobody really understands. So having an actual character that could explain this was really, just felt like the right thing to do.
Yeah.
So we started with our 5 foundations. Now let's walk through each of them in a little bit more detail and talk about how Fentiman came to life. So Kev, when developing Fentiman, what elements of the Fentimans brand were most important to capture and why? And how did we go about doing that?
So from the start, we wanted Fentiman to embody everything drinks stand for. Uniquely handcrafted, full of character, sophisticated but with a modern twist. So he became this debonair, youthful but wise character. He's pretty timeless, if you like. Think of him like a man in his early 30s, but with a century of wisdom and worldly experience. A wise head on young shoulders. Someone who could carry both heritage and modernity. That balance was really key.
I have to agree with that. The thing that was bothering me the most was how do we do heritage and not be old-fashioned? So we had to try and strike a balance between pulling that timelessness through him, but actually showing that we're a brand that's still developing, we're still doing NPD, and we're still moving forward with the market.
So Jayne, what did you see Fentiman's role as being from the start? What kind of job did he need to do for the brand?
So this is really interesting because when we were developing a character, I had to think carefully about how would we use him. I didn't want him just slapped meaninglessly across everything. So his role became really clear that he would be the person that guides consumers into making the correct drink choices, an advocate for the brand, not a salesperson, just a wise character that would help people make the right, tasteful drinks choices. So we could see that he would work in brand advertising, but I could also see a role for him in point of sale. So actually a character that when people are shopping can point them, literally point them to pick up the right drinks.
And we actually coined a phrase of kind of what his role was, which was an ambassador of exquisite taste. So we actually even named him. So Kev, once we'd defined what Fentiman's role was as that ambassador for the brand, how did you and the team go about shaping that creatively?
Yeah, so with him being a proper debonair gent, Fentiman doesn't get his hands dirty. He knows all about the unique botanical brewing process, but he leaves the actual making to the experts themselves. He's far happier sipping the drinks and spreading the word about how incredible they taste. Creatively, that gave us endless opportunities and storytelling ways in. He's not just selling a product, but he's championing the whole way of life. One that's all about sophistication, taste, and a little bit more of a mischief every now and again.
So Jayne, what was important to you in making sure that Fentiman not only struck the right tone for Fentiman's brand, but also the right tone for the target audience as well?
Yeah, so we consider ourselves a premium soft drinks brand, and so we needed him to present himself as premium, but there's a fine line. We didn't want him to be pompous. So it was getting that right blend of sophistication, but not off-putting or snobby.
So Kev, personality is everything here, and there was a real kind of balancing act to be done from a creative perspective. As Jayne's just mentioned, we needed him to be likeable, we needed to make sure he didn't come across as pompous, but that he still spoke to the heritage of the Fentimans brand. So what qualities did you feel he had to have to be both likeable and distinctive?
A lot of work went into getting his personality like bang on. He needed to be charming, witty and eloquent. The kind of character, people want to hang out with. It was all about balance as well, eccentric and outspoken, but never offensive. Gentlemanly, but definitely not old-fashioned.
And Jayne, from your perspective, the kind of crafting Fentiman's personality and kind of how he spoke was definitely something that was quite iterative. And we ended up holding some focus groups to make sure that his character, personality and what he was saying really resonated with our target audience. And what sort of kind of reassurances did the focus groups give not only you as a marketing director, but the rest of the business in what Fentimans could bring?
From the moment I saw the concept, I was pretty certain that we were doing the right thing with the character. But this was completely something new for Fentimans as a brand. Having a character was actually quite out there for the business. We'd historically done a lot of product shots, and we'd played on ideas of a botanical garden, etc. But this was going in a completely different direction. So I had to make sure that we were not going to do anything that would damage the brand and provide people with that reassurance. So the focus groups were really important, just testing the concept in general, and then making sure we'd got the character just right. And what came through in the groups was a general feeling that the character was likeable. And I was able to go back to the owner of the business and the rest of the leadership team and just give them a moment where they could say, okay, we feel confident moving forward now.
Absolutely. And that's why getting the perspective of the customer is actually really, really important and can be really useful in helping to sell a character into the rest of the business as well.
So it's actually not just about that selling, and I probably focused a bit too much just now on that piece, which is important. Stakeholders are important, but it's also about anticipating, is this going to be effective? And again, I mean, that's the most important thing after all.
So now this part of the journey is where the craft of Fentiman really, really shines through. And it was a part of the journey that we all collectively really enjoyed, but it definitely took some time to get there and kind of get to the finished Fentiman as he is today. So Kev, tell me, where did you start when you started kind of exploring what Fentiman would look like and refining what that looked like?
So we kicked things off in a really, traditional way. Several rounds of hand sketches, lots of inspiration gathering and plenty of research to figure out who exactly the Fentiman should be. We could have gone full CGI at this stage, but that just didn't feel right for the brand, It wouldn't have sat with the brand's ethos of making handcrafted products. But making him out of wood felt right. Giving him a tangible, artisanal quality in every detail, from his carved face to his ginger root inspired hair, it just felt real and ultimately crafted. And it's part of what makes him so charming, approachable, and a perfect reflection of the care and quality behind the Fentimans drinks themselves.
And then Jayne, in terms of Fentiman's kind of outfit and the outfit details as well, there was obviously a lot of time and thought that went into that. So can you talk us through that in a little bit more detail?
So as well as the handcrafted wooden nature of the character, we spent a lot of time looking at his outfit and having nods to the product. So there was the hair, which was the colour of our ginger beer, as was his waistcoat and his shoes, little brown shoes. And we had a bow tie that was the colour of blue of our tonic water. And dandelion and burdock was his jacket. Yes. And whilst this all seems a little bit sort of extra, what I liked about this was it actually gave another layer of depth to the character, and it also gave me some extra content, and I'm being quite honest here, it gave me extra content for PR. So when we launched the character, we could gave us an excuse to talk about all the flavours of our drinks. Also, I think at this point, our owner, who was very much part of the sign-off process, he got quite excited at this point as well, because a lot of the drinks, he's invented them. So he started adding little touches. So the character has a pocket watch as well, which is a nod to the amount of time, the 7 days it takes to make the flavours of our drinks.
But that process, like really diving into what the brand stands for, what assets we have to play with, really help make decisions on all these finer details. Yeah. These details the customer will never know about really, but we do, and that's part of that backstory we were talking about before. Yeah. That it just makes them feel real and authentic.
And I think one of the things that everybody realises when you go through a creative process like this is there's a lot of subjectivity. And I think you just sort of landed a really useful point there. The colours of his outfit, we could have gone round the houses for 6 months on what colour is his waistcoat. Yeah. But the fact that we used our drinks as the colour palette just took some of that out of it.
Totally, yeah.
I think what's actually quite important to mention at this point, before we jump into his kind of tone of voice, which is another really important piece of this section, is up to this point, we'd defined what he looked like and what his kind of clothing was kind of inspired by, but we hadn't actually yet started making them, which was an entire journey in itself, in terms of finding a partner who could really bring him to life off those sketches. So Kev, I remember quite a lot of calls between me and you at the early on stages of this process, diving into the world of puppeteers, which is a complex world for anyone who hasn't done that. Yeah, literally. I had no idea it was so complex. But we landed on and started working with a brand called Codsteaks, who are based down in Bristol. And that process of them sculpting him was actually something I didn't really think would take as much time as it did, but kind of really is where the craft and the handmade nature of Fentiman really shines through. They kind of sculpted him in clay. We had so many versions of him sent through of where, and he's he's about this high, he's 30 centimetres, so these details are so minute, but kind of loads of effort and loads of time was poured into every inch of them.
Those clay casts really help us kind of like define and iteration after iteration, you know, like to really get them perfect.
Absolutely.
And it's probably worth mentioning actually just from a client perspective, because I think people find it's interesting, is if you're building something from scratch and you've got clay and then you're going to go into wood, it's like, at what stage do I show this to my stakeholders for approval? And I had to sort of have this balance of, if I show too soon, people might not understand what he's going to be and then be stressed. And I did have a bit of this. And then, or if you go too far, then it's too late to change what you're doing and it's going to cost money to go back to here. And I won't say that I got that perfect. At certain points I went too soon. But this was the game I was trying to play, is like, when is the right stage so people can still have input, but not completely throw us off the rails and having to start again.
Yeah. No, that's a really good point actually, because the clay versions of Fentiman and the versions of him without his clothes on look very, very different to the polished version that we have now.
Showing naked clay puppets to people, there was a lesson.
So when it kind of came to his tone of voice, we know tone of voice and how he sounds is kind of really, really important, equally as important as what he looks like. We spent a lot of time talking about his accent and where he came from. What were kind of some key considerations when it came to developing that tone, what he was going to say and how he was going to say it?
So his voice was as carefully crafted as his overall look. He's a cultured, well-travelled, has impeccable taste, and his tone is refined, it's eloquent, it's full of character. There's a quirky, eccentric charm in there too as well. And this is what we think makes him memorable and fun without ever feeling over the top. He's youthful, but has maturity and an assuredness that gives him this kind of wise head on young shoulders vibe. Smooth, eloquent, charming, characteristic, and characterful. That's the balance we were aiming for, essentially. He's from an affluent part of the north. You know, he's got years travelling the globe behind him. That's kind of softened his accent to mostly neutral, with the occasional northern lilt slipping in there.
So, Jayne, Kev's just spoke about there in terms of the definition of Fentiman's voice being a very well-crafted part of the journey. When it came to hearing what he sounded like for the first time, did he sound like what you thought and what you imagined him to, or what was that sort of the process like in terms of selecting the voice for him?
Yeah, this was quite a difficult stage because, again, you go into an area which can become quite subjective. So the voices were largely what I had in mind. We did have a lot of debate about accent and how far to go with the northern lilt. And I think, you know, we are a brand, we're actually, you know, a global brand. A lot of people don't know that. We're in 70 countries. Whilst this was a UK-centric campaign, we are national. So I think we decided to just keep that accent part subtle, sort of authentic but subtle. And I think the hardest bit was at the point where you start to share voices with multiple stakeholders, as I've mentioned before, because when you're building a character, everybody has something in their head of what they are expecting. So again, it's whether you go confidently with one voice for approval or whether you give a choice. So that was probably the hardest bit for me, is working out what level of choice do we give and how do we land with something that we all feel comfortable with.
And last but not least, his backstory. So we've spoke about earlier, we like to develop a backstory for our characters. It's not necessarily something that is outward facing, but from a creative perspective, it really helps with crafting narrative and kind of lines and stories. And from a client perspective, I guess it kind of really helps give guardrails of what the character will and won't get involved in. So can you kind of both talk us through how we crafted that backstory for Fentiman?
Yeah, sure. So we imagined Fentiman as this kind of man of insatiable curiosity. Someone who spent decades travelling the world, seeking out the very best life has to offer. He looks youthful, but there's this timeless, almost supernatural quality about him. You know, he's been around since the Victorian era, but will probably outlive all of us. Even though we'll never spell this out in the backstory to our public, it gives him real depth and consistency. It tells us how he talks, how he reacts, and what he loves. All these little details just make him feel real, like a fully formed character.
And I guess from my perspective, I just come at it from a more practical lens, that even though you guys at Drummond came up with this character, we also have to think about how do we use them in retail comms, how do we use them in PR. You're working with other agencies that we work with, and how do we make sure they're clear on what he does say, what he doesn't say, etc. So I think the backstory helps there. And then we, updated our brand guidelines and had to put how do you use Fentiman into that. So all of this extra narrative helps provide a guide for me when I'm briefing other people how to use them too.
So Jayne, when Fentiman launched, how did people initially respond to him as a character?
Well, overall, really positive. I mean, initially, actually, when I did my internal launch and we'd kept this really hush-hush, people were a bit like, oh, wow, we've got a character. Because I think when I said I was working on a new brand campaign, no one expected that. So it was kind of a nice surprise from everybody internally. And then when we launched to the public through our advertising campaign, the response was great. The first campaign, we increased brand awareness. We also did some additional questions in our tracking, and we moved the needle on consideration. And we talked a lot about his actual character. The likability pulled through to an improved likability of our brand as well. So all good stuff.
So Fentiman is a brilliant example of the 5 foundations in practice. He's a character with real charm, memorability, and standout. I hope you've enjoyed joining us today in talking all about how we craft brand characters. And if you'd like to see what that looks like for your brand, then we'd love to hear more.